Are you enjoying these untold Sherlock Holmes stories? If so, you can listen to even more exclusive Untold Sherlock Holmes adventures on my Patreon. Do check it out. The link is in the description below. It was, I recall, during the sweltering late July of a year which I shall leave unspecified, that London was gripped by a heat wave of such relentless ferocity that the very asphalt of the streets seemed to yield beneath the wheels of the passing hansoms. The air was stagnant, heavy with the myriad odours of the metropolis, and a yellow, suffocating haze hung low over the rooftops, turning the afternoon sun into a dull copper coin. In our rooms at 221B Baker Street, the stifling atmosphere had driven my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, into a state of profound and irritable lethargy. For 3 days he had scarcely moved from his armchair, draped in his mouse-coloured dressing-gown, surrounded by a chaotic litter of morning papers, which he would occasionally puncture with a sarcastic comment before letting them flutter to the floor. The great intellect, deprived of the nourishment of a complex problem, was turning inward, threatening to gnaw upon itself. I had feared a return to those artificial stimulants which I so despised, but the heat seemed to have sapped even his desire for the cocaine bottle. It is a city of baked brick and boiled humanity. Watson, Holmes murmured on the afternoon of the 4th day, his eyes half closed, long white fingers steepled together beneath his chin. Not a spark of imagination left in the criminal classes. They murder out of heat madness and rob out of base necessity. But the artistry, Watson, the artistry is dead. I have perused the police court reports from Whitechapel to Westminster, and there is nothing but the tedious brutality of the commonplace. Perhaps it is for the best, I replied, wiping the perspiration from my brow with a kerchief. The constabulary are surely grateful for the respite. Holmes uttered a sharp bark of cynical laughter. The constabulary, my dear doctor, are entirely at sea, without the occasional beacon of an exceptional crime to guide them. If a truly singular event were to occur today, Lestrade and his brethren would be found sweating into their helmets, utterly confounded. And yet, he added, a sudden, sharp gleam appearing in his grey eyes, I hear the heavy, measured tread of precisely such a confounded man upon our stairs. I listened, but over the rumble of Baker Street I could distinguish nothing until a heavy knock shook our door. A moment later, Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard entered the room. His face, normally ferret-like and pale, was flushed a deep crimson, and he mopped his face vigorously with a large checked handkerchief. "Good afternoon, Lestrade," said Holmes, not rising from his chair. "You find us attempting to dissolve into the atmosphere. You, on the other hand, look as though you have sprinted from Whitehall. I perceive from the chalk dust upon your left trouser leg and the slight smudge of axle grease upon your cuff that you have recently been climbing about in a railway station, specifically one undergoing masonry repairs." Lestrade stared, his handkerchief pausing in mid-air. "By George, Mr. Holmes, you have eyes in the back of your head. It is St. Pancras, and a devil of a business it is too. I came straight here, knowing you complain when we tidy up a scene before you've had a chance to poke about in the dust." "A scene?" Holmes inquired, the lethargy vanishing from his frame as he sat up straight. "A murder, I presume?" "Murder, undoubtedly, though how, when, and by whom is entirely beyond us. It is the most bizarre affair, Mr. Holmes. A trunk, sir, a large black leather trunk bound in brass, deposited at the left luggage office of St. Pancras Station. Luggage offices are the repositories of many secrets, Holmes noted, his eyes shining with the hunter's instinct. Pray, continue. It was deposited early Tuesday morning. The clerk barely remembered the man who brought it, said he was of average height, wearing a heavy ulster coat and a pulled-down bowler, which struck him as odd, given the weather. The ticket was issued, and the trunk sat. But this morning the porters noticed a foul odour emanating from it. The heat, you see, had hastened certain natural processes. Lestrade grimaced. Furthermore, a dark, viscous fluid had begun to seep from the lower seam, pooling upon the floorboards. "And so you opened it?" I interjected. "We forced the lock, Dr. Watson, and inside, folded into an impossibly cramped position, was the body of a man." "But that is not the strangest part, Mr. Holmes. The man was entirely naked, stripped to the skin. There is not a shred of clothing, no identifying papers, no labels on the trunk, and no obvious wound upon the body. He has simply been plucked from the world, stripped bare, and boxed up like unwanted cargo." Holmes leaped to his feet with the agility of a panther, his earlier languor entirely forgotten. "Excellent! A man reduced to his fundamental components, devoid of the sartorial clues by which society defines him. Watson, my boots. Lestrade, you have brought a four-wheeler? It is waiting below. Then let us not delay. The heat, which has accelerated the decay of our unfortunate victim, may also have accelerated the evaporation of our clues." The cab ride to St. Pancras station was a stifling affair, but Holmes sat leaning forward, his eager profile sharp against the window, questioning Lestrade with rapid-fire precision. "The trunk itself, was there any manufacturer's mark?" "None," Lestrade replied. "The brass lock had been filed smooth, removing whatever maker's name might have been stamped there. The leather is old, scuffed, and utterly generic." "And the victim?" "A well-built man, perhaps 40 years of age, muscular, brown hair, turning grey at the temples, clean-shaven. No signs of strangulation? No petechial hemorrhages in the eyes, Watson, as one might expect?" "The police surgeon, Dr. Barnicot, is there now," Lestrade said. "He reports no broken hyoid bone, no bruising on the neck, no puncture wounds that he could find." "We shall see for ourselves." St. Pancras Station was a cathedral of steam and iron, its massive arched roof trapping the heat of the locomotives and the pressing throngs of humanity. We were ushered through the bustling concourse by a pair of uniformed constables, drawing curious stares from passengers until we reached the gloomier, quieter recesses of the left luggage office. A canvas screen had been erected to shield the gruesome discovery from the public eye. Behind the screen, the stench of death in the enclosed, sweltering space was overpowering. I instinctively pressed a camphor-scented handkerchief to my nose, but Holmes seemed entirely oblivious to the atmosphere. His eyes were fixed upon the grim tableau before us. The trunk, a formidable object of battered black leather and heavy brass corners, sat open. Beside it, upon a canvas tarp laid out by the constables, lay the deceased. Dr. Barnicot, a weary-looking man with spectacles pushed up on his forehead, stood up as we approached. "Ah, Holmes, Lestrade said he was fetching you." Barnicot sighed. "You are welcome to him. I can find no cause of death. Heart failure, perhaps brought on by the heat?" "A man does not suffer heart failure, strip himself naked, fold himself into a trunk, and carry himself to St. Pancras," Holmes remarked dryly, dropping to his knees upon the hard floor. He drew his magnifying glass from his pocket and bent over the corpse. For the next 20 minutes there was absolute silence behind the canvas screen, broken only by the distant hiss of steam engine and the frantic, shallow breathing of Lestrade. Holmes moved over the body with the intensity of a bloodhound. He examined the lips, the gums, the nostrils. He ran his sensitive fingers along the spine, feeling every vertebra. He peered closely at the fingernails and the soles of the feet. I watched his face, knowing his method so intimately. The sharp intake of breath, the sudden stiffening of the shoulders, the darting movement of the glass. Each physical tick spoke volumes to me. "No clothing, no pockets, no watch chain," Holmes murmured almost to himself. "The murderer has attempted to erase the man's identity entirely. But the body itself is an autobiography, written in the language of scars, calluses and dust. The man cannot help but carry his history upon his flesh." "Have you found something, Mr. Holmes?" Lestrade asked eagerly. Holmes did not answer immediately. He had taken a small silver probe from his waistcoat pocket and was delicately scraping the inner convolutions of the dead man's right ear. He withdrew the probe, upon the tip of which rested a tiny accumulation of greyish-white matter. Producing a small glass vial, he tapped the substance into it and corked it securely. He repeated the process with the left ear. Next, he turned his attention to the man's hands. He lifted the rigid, cooling right hand and brought his lens so close it nearly touched the skin. "Fascinating," he whispered. "Watson, I pray you, step here and apply your medical knowledge." I knelt beside him. "What am I looking at?" "The palmar surface of the hands. Note the calluses." "What do they tell you?" I examined the thickened skin. "They are pronounced. The man was a manual labourer." "Be specific, my dear doctor. Where exactly are they located?" "Well," I said, tracing the hardened areas, "they are not upon the fingertips, so he was not a tailor or a musician. They are located heavily upon the palmar side of the middle phalanges, extending into the crease of the palm itself. The index and middle fingers are particularly heavily calloused." "And the lateral aspect of the little finger?" Holmes prompted. "Yes, there is a distinct hardened ridge there as well." "Excellent, Watson. And what action produces such a specific distribution of friction?" I frowned, pantomiming various physical acts. "Rowing? A sailor hauling ropes?" "A sailor hauls wet, rough hemp, Watson. It tears the skin of the entire palm and leaves broad, flat calluses. Furthermore, a sailor's hands are frequently scarred by tar and brine. These hands are remarkably clean, save for the dirt of recent hours. No, the grip required to produce these calluses involves holding a thick, relatively soft, vertical cylinder of material, pulling downwards with immense force and allowing the material to slide slightly through the grip upon the release. The ridge on the little finger comes from wrapping the lowest extremity of this material to secure the grip." "Then what is it?" Lestrade demanded. "Let us consult the final witness, the trunk," Holmes said, bounding to his feet and leaving the hands. He examined the exterior of the trunk, then leaned his head entirely inside the empty receptacle, sniffing deeply. "Cedar wood lining, highly porous. It has absorbed the scent of the victim, but beneath that, a faint, musty odour. Not damp, precisely, but old. The dust of centuries." Holmes withdrew his head and turned to us, his eyes blazing with the triumphant fire of deduction. "The murderer has been thorough, but not thorough enough," Holmes declared, dusting off his knees. Lestrade, you may instruct your men to remove the body to the mortuary. The autopsy will reveal, I believe, a microscopic puncture wound at the base of the skull, penetrating the medulla oblongata, most likely administered with a hat pin or a very fine awl. Death would have been instantaneous, mimicking heart failure. Barnicot gasped and hurried to examine the back of the neck. By heavens, there is a tiny fleck of dried blood hidden in the hairline. I missed it entirely. It requires a focused eye, Holmes said reasonably. Lestrade, you are looking for a man whose name I do not yet know, but whose profession and residence I can give you with absolute certainty. The victim is a professional campanologist, a bell ringer, and he hails from a very specific village in the South Downs of Sussex. Lestrade's jaw dropped. A bell ringer? From Sussex? Mr. Holmes, this is witchcraft. The man is naked in a London railway station. It is observation and deduction, Inspector. The calluses on the hands are the unmistakable signature of a man who spends hours gripping the sally, the tufted woolen section of a church bell rope. The grip, the pull, the slide. It marks the hands precisely as Dr. Watson and I observed. A man does not develop such calluses ringing a handbell. He must be pulling a tenor bell of substantial weight. But Sussex? I asked, equally bewildered. Holmes tapped the glass vial in his pocket. The ear, Watson, is a natural receptacle for the airborne debris of a man's environment. The bell ringer stands in a draughty tower. Above him, ancient bells swing upon oaken frames. As they ring, friction creates a microscopic rain of dust. I observed this dust in the man's ears. It is a mixture of three distinct substances. The first is a greyish-white powder. The second is pulverized dark wood. The third is a metallic flake. The white powder is calcium carbonate, specifically the fine chalk dust unique to the geological stratum of the South Downs. The wood is ancient oak. The metallic flake is bronze, the bell metal itself oxidizing and shedding minute particles. Our man rings bells in an old oak-framed belfry built upon the chalk hills of Sussex. There are dozens of villages in the South Downs, Lestrade objected. True, Holmes said, which is why we must return to Baker Street. I require my microscope, my chemical reagents, and my index of county histories. By tonight, Lestrade, I shall give you the name of the village. Meet us at Victoria Station tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. We are taking a trip to the country. The evening at Baker Street was a study in concentrated energy. Holmes had transformed our sitting room into a laboratory. The smell of rotting flesh that seemed to have clung to our clothes was soon masked by the pungent fumes of hydrochloric acid and ammonia. Holmes sat hunched over his brass microscope, a slide containing the ear dust illuminated by the bright beam of a bull's-eye lantern. I sat in my armchair, smoking my pipe and watching him, mesmerized by the delicate precision of his hands as he applied drops of chemical reagents to the slide. "Remarkable," he muttered, after nearly 2 hours of silence. "Truly singular." "What is it, Holmes?" "The chalk dust, Watson. It is not merely chalk. It contains microscopic fossilized remains, foraminifera. But the specific concentration and type of these ancient marine fossils point to a very localized chalk quarrying area. Furthermore, the oak dust." He turned to me, his eyes gleaming. I applied a weak solution of iron sulfate. It reacted with the tannins in the wood. The oak is deeply saturated with a particular dampness, a maritime salinity, even though it is elevated in a belfry. It suggests a tower exposed to strong, salt-laden coastal winds, yet nestled in a chalk valley. He bounded across the room to his bookshelf, pulling down heavy leather-bound topographical surveys and gazetteers of Sussex. He flipped through the pages with lightning speed, murmuring to himself, "Cuckmere? No, too far inland. Alfriston? Possible. But the church is cruciform with a central tower. The bell chamber is remarkably enclosed. Ah, what about St. Jude's in the village of High Tarring, situated on a chalk ridge? Norman Tower, exposed to the southwesterlies from the Channel, and—" He ran his finger down a page of local history. The peal of 6 bells was recast in 1642, hung in the original medieval oak frame. Watson, we have our destination. High Tarring? Exactly. A village of perhaps 400 souls nestled in a fold of the Downs. It is there we shall find the empty space left by our murdered bell-ringer. The following morning, beneath a sky that promised another day of punishing heat, we met a sceptical Inspector Lestrade at Victoria Station. We boarded the southbound train, leaving the smoky pall of London behind for the rolling green and glaring white chalk pits of the Sussex countryside. During the journey, Holmes summarised his deductions for Lestrade, who listened with a mixture of awe and obstinate doubt. "It's a fine theory, Mr. Holmes," the inspector conceded as the train rattled past the sweeping curves of the Downs. "But even if this man is a bell-ringer from High Tarring, why bring his body to London? Why the St. Pancras luggage office?" "A classic strategy of obfuscation," Holmes replied, gazing out at the passing sheep-dotted hills. "The murderer required time. Time to clean up the scene of the crime, time to establish an alibi, or time to complete whatever nefarious business the bell-ringer's death was meant to conceal. By removing all clothing and identification and transporting the body to a busy London terminus, the murderer hoped the corpse would remain a John Doe for weeks, perhaps forever. The choice of St. Pancras, rather than a southern terminus like Victoria or London Bridge, further distances the body from Sussex. It forces the police to look northwards. "And the lack of clothes?" I asked. "Clothes are hopelessly articulate," Holmes said. "A local tailor's label, the specific mud on a boot, the tobacco in a pocket, any of these would have led the police straight to Sussex. The trunk was the perfect anonymous vessel." We alighted at a small, sun-drenched station several miles from High Tarring and hired a trap to take us the rest of the way. The village was a picturesque cluster of flint-walled cottages with thatched roofs, nestled in a valley where the chalk hills rose steeply on either side. At the highest point of the village stood the church of St. Jude, its square flint-and-stone Norman tower looming over the graveyard. We directed the driver to the local inn, the Chalk and Cheese, where Holmes immediately engaged the ruddy-faced publican in conversation over a pint of ale. "A warm day to be visiting High Tarring, gentlemen," the publican said, wiping the bar. "Indeed," Holmes replied affably. "We are amateur campanologists, touring the county to study the historic bell frames of the Downs. We were hoping to speak with the captain of your local bell-ringers." The publican's face clouded over. "Ah, well, you've come at a bad time for the bells, sir. The tower's been silent these past 3 days." Holmes caught my eye, a spark of triumph flashing in his gaze. "Silent? How so?" "It's Elias Thorne, sir, our tower captain. He's gone missing." Lestrade nearly choked on his ale. I covered my surprise by lighting a cigar. Missing? Holmes prompted gently. Since when? Since Monday evening, the publican replied, leaning in conspiratorially. He's a bachelor, you see. Lives alone in a cottage near the churchyard wall. He went up to the tower on Monday night to do some maintenance. Greasing the gudgeons, he said. He never came down. Hasn't been seen since. The vicar is beside himself, and the local constable is out searching the woods, thinking Elias might have taken a tumble and hit his head. "Could you describe Mr. Thorne?" Lestrade asked, pulling out his notebook. "Stout fellow, about 40, strong as an ox from hauling the tenor bell. Brown hair, getting a bit frosty at the sides." "Thank you, landlord," Holmes said, placing a half-sovereign on the bar. "You have been most helpful. I believe we shall pay our respects to the vicar." We left the inn and walked up the steep, winding lane toward the church. Lestrade was practically vibrating with excitement. "You've done it, Mr. Holmes. The dead man in the trunk is Elias Thorne." "It would certainly appear so," Holmes agreed. "But identifying the victim is only the first act of our play. We must now discover why Elias Thorne was murdered, and who went to such extraordinary lengths to post him to London. And for that, the belfry must speak." The vicar of St. Jude's, Reverend Mr. Arbuthnot, was a frail, scholarly man who seemed overwhelmed by the disappearance of his bell-ringer. He eagerly handed over the heavy iron key to the church tower. "Elias is a good man," the vicar said nervously. "A bit solitary, perhaps. He spent half his life in that tower. He said the bells spoke to him. I cannot imagine what could have befallen him." "We shall endeavour to find out, vicar," Holmes said gently. We unlocked the heavy oak door at the base of the tower and began the ascent. The air inside was cool, damp, and redolent of stone dust, bat guano, and the passage of centuries. A narrow, spiralling stone staircase led us upward, our footsteps echoing hollowly in the confined space. At the first landing we entered the ringing chamber. 6 thick hempen ropes, each fitted with a brightly coloured woolen sally, hung in a circle from the ceiling. Holmes immediately went to work. He crawled upon the wooden floor with his magnifying glass, inching his way around the room. Lestrade and I watched in silence, knowing better than to interrupt his process. "Ah!" Holmes said suddenly, his nose inches from the floorboards near the rope of the tenor bell. "Here we are. The narrative of Monday night." I knelt beside him. The ancient dusty floor was marred by a series of scuff marks. "A struggle?" I asked. "A brief one," Holmes said. "Look here, a heavy boot, thorns presumably, scraped backward here, displacing the dust. And here a smaller, sharper heel print, an intruder. The intruder stood behind Thorne while he was examining the rope. A sudden strike to the base of the skull with the piercing instrument. Thorne falls." Holmes crawled a few feet away toward the wall. "And here a few drops of a dark, dried liquid. Blood, Watson. The puncture wound bled only slightly, but enough to leave a signature." "But how did the murderer get the body out?" Lestrade asked. "Down those narrow spiral stairs, carrying a dead weight of 14 stone? An excellent question, Inspector, and one that points to the physical strength and audacity of the murderer." Holmes stood up and looked toward a small, narrow window, a slit in the thick flint wall of the ringing chamber. He walked over to it and peered out. "Come here, Watson. Tell me what you see." I looked through the narrow slit. It offered a commanding view over the churchyard wall, looking directly down into the private grounds of a large, imposing Tudor-style manor house. The grounds were shielded from the village road by a high brick wall. But from this elevated vantage point in the tower, the walled garden and the large, glass-roof conservatory attached to the rear of the manor were plainly visible. "I see a large house with a conservatory," I said. "That is the manor house," Holmes said, his voice dropping to an urgent murmur. "Who resides there, I wonder?" We descended the tower and returned the key to the vicar, whom we found anxiously tending to the roses in the churchyard. "Reverend Arbuthnot," Holmes inquired, "could you tell me who occupies the large manor house adjoining the church property?" The vicar looked up, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "That is the residence of Sir Reginald Vane. He is the local squire, though he rarely involves himself in village affairs. A rather reclusive gentleman. He inherited the estate a year ago after the sudden tragic death of his older brother, Sir Arthur." "Tragic death?" Holmes's ears practically pricked up. "Yes! Sir Arthur drowned in the Channel while sailing his yacht. A terrible storm. His body was washed ashore a week later, terribly battered by the rocks. It was a closed casket, of course. Sir Reginald, who had been living abroad in South America, returned to take up the title and the estate." "I see," Holmes said, his eyes glittering with a cold, hard light. "And does Sir Reginald employ a large staff?" "Only a housekeeper and a groundsman who lives over the stables. He is a man who values his privacy." "And have there been any recent changes to the estate?" Holmes pressed, his tone deceptively casual. "Well, now that you mention it," the vicar said, adjusting his spectacles. "Sir Reginald recently engaged a firm of engineers to lay new heating pipes beneath the conservatory floor. A terribly extensive job, I understand. They were due to break ground this very week." "Thank you, Vicar. You have been more illuminating than you can know." As we walked away from the church, Holmes turned to us, his pace quickening with nervous energy. "The pieces, Watson. They are falling into place with the precision of a Swiss timepiece." "I confess I am entirely in the dark," Lestrade grumbled. "What does the squire's dead brother have to do with a naked bell-ringer in St. Pancras?" "Everything, Lestrade. Let us review the facts. Sir Arthur Vane dies in a boating accident. His body is battered beyond recognition by the rocks. His younger brother Reginald inherits. Reginald is a recluse with a large private walled garden, a garden overlooked by only one vantage point in the entire village, the ringing chamber of the church tower." Holmes paused, striking his walking stick upon the dusty road for emphasis. "Now, consider Elias Thorne. On Monday evening he is in the tower. He happens to look out of the narrow window. What does he see in the secluded garden of the manor house that is so terrible, so damning, that Sir Reginald Vane cannot allow him to live?" "You think Sir Reginald murdered Thorne?" I asked, appalled. "I am certain of it. Thorne saw something that revealed a secret Sir Reginald is desperate to keep. Sir Reginald realized he had been observed by the bell-ringer. He slipped into the tower, approached Thorne from behind, and killed him with a single expert thrust of a stiletto or hatpin. Then he faced the problem of the body." "But why undress him? Why the trunk?" Lestrade asked. "Because Sir Reginald is a man of intellect and audacity," Holmes explained. "If Thorne is found dead in the village, there will be an investigation. The police will ask who he interacted with, what he saw. Sir Reginald needed Thorne to vanish. He waited until dark, carried the body down the stairs, a feat of immense strength, suggesting Sir Reginald's time in South America was not spent entirely in drawing rooms, and dragged him over the churchyard wall into his own estate. Then he strips the body to ensure no local tailor's marks can identify the man. He places him in an old trunk from the manor's attics, files off the locks, and drives his own trap to the railway station under cover of night. He books the trunk on the midnight goods train to London, travels with it, and deposits it at St. Pancras. A brilliant, albeit desperate plan to buy time. Time for what? I asked. That, Watson, is what we must discover tonight. Lestrade, I require you to send a telegram to Scotland Yard. Have them dispatch 2 stout men to High Tarring on the evening train. We are going to pay a clandestine visit to the garden of Sir Reginald Vane. The night was moonless and suffocatingly warm. The darkness of the Sussex countryside was profound, broken only by the distant lonely cry of a fox. Holmes, Lestrade, myself, and the 2 plainclothes officers from Scotland Yard crouched in the deep shadows of the churchyard, pressed against the brick wall that separated the holy ground from the manor house estate. Holmes had spent the afternoon making discreet inquiries in the village. He had learned that Sir Reginald had recently ordered a large quantity of quicklime delivered to the manor, ostensibly for horticultural purposes in his conservatory. This piece of information had filled Holmes with a grim satisfaction. "He is destroying evidence, Watson," Holmes had whispered to me in the parlour of the Chalk and Cheese, "and I wager my professional reputation I know what that evidence is." Now, at midnight, Holmes signalled us to move. With the agility of a cat, he scaled the brick wall and dropped silently into the soft earth of the manor garden. I followed, then Lestrade, and finally the 2 burly constables. We found ourselves in a beautifully manicured garden, heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Ahead of us loomed the dark bulk of the manor house, and extending from its rear the large glass conservatory, its panes reflecting the starlight. A faint, flickering yellow light glowed from within the conservatory. Holmes gestured for absolute silence. We crept across the damp lawn, moving from the shadow of an oak tree to a large rhododendron bush, until we were pressed against the low brick wall upon which the glass frame of the conservatory rested. Peering cautiously through the damp street glass, a macabre scene presented itself. The interior of the conservatory was illuminated by a single oil lantern hanging from a beam. In the centre of the tiled floor, a man was working furiously with a pickaxe and spade. He was stripped to his undershirt, his muscular back gleaming with sweat in the stifling heat of the glass house. He was a handsome man, but his face, illuminated by the lantern light, was twisted into a mask of desperate, savage effort. He had excavated a large trench in the earth beds of the conservatory. Beside the trench lay several heavy sacks, the quicklime. "Watch closely," Holmes breathed into my ear. The man, Sir Reginald Vane, threw aside the spade and reached into the trench. With a grunt of exertion, he hauled something heavy and shapeless out of the hole, dropping it onto the tiled floor. It was a decaying canvas tarp, bound tightly with ropes. "Now, Lestrade!" Holmes barked, his voice shattering the stillness of the night. With a crash of breaking glass, Holmes kicked open the conservatory door and burst inside, a heavy walking stick in his hand. I followed instantly, drawing my revolver with Lestrade and the constables right behind me. Sir Reginald spun around, dropping the rope. He stared at us, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with the trapped fury of a cornered beast. For a moment, I thought he would fight. He snatched up the heavy iron spade and raised it like a weapon. "Drop it, Sir Reginald," Lestrade commanded, stepping forward. "I am Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, and you are surrounded." Sir Reginald looked from Lestrade's stern face to the gleaming barrel of my revolver, and finally to the cold, penetrating gaze of Sherlock Holmes. Slowly the fight drained out of him. The spade clattered to the floor tiles. He collapsed onto an overturned terracotta pot, burying his face in his dirt-stained hands. "The game is up, Sir Reginald," Holmes said, stepping forward. "Or should I say, the charade of the two brothers is finally at an end." Lestrade looked bewildered. "The two brothers?"
"Indeed," Holmes said, gesturing to the muddy, foul-smelling canvas bundle on the floor. "Open it, Inspector, but prepare yourself." One of the constables drew a knife and slit the ropes binding the canvas. As the tarp fell away, a sickening odour filled the enclosed space. Inside lay the partially decomposed remains of a man. "Good God!" Lestrade gasped, stepping back. "Is this another one?" "This," Holmes proclaimed, his voice ringing with absolute certainty, "is the true Sir Arthur Vane, the rightful lord of this manor." Sir Reginald let out a hollow, despairing groan, refusing to look up. "It is a classic tale of Cain and Abel, motivated by greed and facilitated by geographical distance," Holmes explained, pacing the floor of the conservatory. "Sir Arthur and Reginald were brothers. Reginald, the younger, a scoundrel sent to South America to avoid scandal. Sir Arthur, the wealthy heir. When Reginald returned to England secretly, he confronted his brother here, in the privacy of the estate. An argument ensued, culminating in murder. Reginald buried his brother beneath the soil of this very conservatory." "But the body washed up on the beach?" I asked, struggling to follow the tangled web of deception. "A convenient piece of flotsam," Holmes said grimly. "A drowned sailor, battered beyond recognition by the rocks of the channel. Reginald simply claimed it was his brother, burying a stranger in the family vault with full honours, while he stepped into Sir Arthur's shoes, his title, and his wealth. Who was to question him? He had been abroad for years. The staff here were new and hardly knew the brothers apart. It was a perfect usurpation. "Until Monday night," I deduced. "Precisely, Watson. Reginald felt secure until he learned of the impending installation of the new heating pipes. The engineers would tear up this very floor. The body would be discovered. He had no choice but to exhume his brother and destroy the remains with quicklime before the workmen arrived on Tuesday. He chose Monday night, thinking the village was asleep." Holmes turned his piercing gaze upon the broken man sitting on the terracotta pot. "But you did not account for Elias Thorne, did you? The dedicated bell-ringer who climbed his tower late at night to tend his beloved bells." Thorne looked out the narrow slit window. He saw into the brilliantly lit glass conservatory. He saw you, Sir Reginald, digging up a human body. He saw the truth. Sir Reginald finally raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and dead. "I heard a noise, a clatter of wood from the tower. I looked up. In the moonlight, I saw his face pressed against the glass slit. I knew he had seen me. He knew who I was. He knew what I was doing. I had no choice." "There is always a choice between murder and the gallows, Sir Reginald," Holmes said coldly. "You chose to compound your sins.
You hurried to the church, ascended the stairs, and struck Thorn down from behind with an awl. You dragged him here, stripped him to obscure his origins, and utilised your cunning to ship him to London, hoping he would vanish into the anonymous machinery of the metropolis. "It was the heat," Sir Reginald muttered wildly. "The heat made me mad, the smell of the soil, the fear. I thought if I sent him far away, I would have time to dissolve Arthur's bones, time to make everything disappear. The truth, Sir Reginald, rarely disappears. It is stubborn. It clings to a man in the form of chalk dust in the ear and the rough calluses upon his hands." Holmes turned to Lestrade. "Inspector, you have your murderer. 2 murders, in fact. I suggest you apply the irons. The air in this glass-house is entirely unbreathable." The journey back to London the following morning was a much more relaxed affair. The oppressive heat-wave had finally broken in the night, and a cooling, gentle rain was falling over the Sussex downs, washing the dust from the leaves and the heat from the air. Lestrade sat opposite us in the first-class carriage, a look of profound satisfaction upon his face. He had his man, he had 2 bodies, and he had a complete confession. It would make his career. "I must admit, Mr. Holmes, it was a masterstroke," Lestrade said generously, lighting a cigar. "When you told me the naked man in the trunk was a bell-ringer, I thought the heat had finally melted your brains. But the way you traced the chalk and the oak dust, it's like magic." "It is not magic, Lestrade, it is chemistry and logic," Holmes replied, leaning back against the velvet cushions and closing his eyes. "The universe is a vast interconnected tapestry. Pull one thread, a single grain of Sussex chalk, and the entire design begins to unravel. The tragedy of the criminal is that he believes he operates in a vacuum. He fails to realize that the world is recording his actions in a million microscopic ways. "Well, the Yard owes you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Holmes," Lestrade said. "Though how I shall write this up in my official report without sounding like a raving lunatic, I do not know." "You may take all the credit, Lestrade, as is your custom," Holmes said with a languid wave of his hand. "My reward is the intellectual exercise, the puzzle itself." "And what a puzzle," I remarked. "To think that the callus on a man's hand could lead to the unmasking of a false lord and the discovery of a body buried in a conservatory." "It is the poetry of deduction, Watson," Holmes murmured, a faint smile playing upon his lips, "though I must confess to a certain begrudging admiration for Sir Reginald." "Admiration, Holmes?" I asked, taken aback. "For his methods, Watson, not his morals. At the outset of this miserable heat-wave, I bemoaned the death of artistry in the criminal classes. Sir Reginald, in his desperate improvisation, provided a flicker of that lost imagination. The substitution of the drowned sailor, the meticulous stripping of Thorn, the audacious dispatch of the trunk to a northern terminus, these were the actions of a mind capable of constructing a complex narrative. He opened one eye and looked at me. It was a grim masterpiece, Watson, but a masterpiece nonetheless. It is a pity he did not turn his intellect to a more profitable enterprise. Holmes lapsed into silence, listening to the rhythmic clatter of the train wheels upon the iron tracks. The terrible lethargy that had possessed him in Baker Street was entirely gone, replaced by the calm, satisfied repose of a mind that had been stretched to its full capacity and found not wanting. As we crossed the River Thames and pulled into the sprawling, smoky expanse of London, Holmes opened his eyes and looked out at the grey, rain-slicked city. "We return to the commonplace, Watson," he said softly, "but perhaps we shall view the passing crowds with a little more respect. After all, every man, from the highest lord to the humblest labourer, carries his history written upon his person, waiting only for an observant eye to read the tale." Thank you for listening. If you'd like to hear more stories, be sure to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description below.